Welcome to the People Teaching People podcast. I'm so glad that you're here. Today, we're diving into something that shows up in every meaningful learning experience, whether we're talking about school, work, parenting, entrepreneurship, creativity, community, or sports. And yet, it's the part we almost never see in other people's stories, even though we live it every day in our own. The messy middle. It's the behind the scenes part of learning, the drafts, the experiments, the moments when we're not quite sure what we're doing, but we're following something that feels important. It's the figuring it out stage before the after photo. And because social media tends to show us the polished moments, the new job announcement on LinkedIn, the smiling team photo after a big event, the launch day post, the beautifully branded carousel on Instagram, we forget how much learning, adjusting, and recalibrating happened long before anyone hit publish. And I think this conversation feels especially important right now because so many of us are navigating change, trying new things, or figuring out next steps, whether we intentionally chose them or life nudged us into them. But the messy middle is where the learning actually happens. It's where curiosity meets practice. It's where ideas get tested, reshaped, or maybe even tossed out altogether. It's where we stretch, stumble, and collect the insights that move us forward. And that's where we're going today, into that in between space where things are a little uncertain, a little uncomfortable, and often far more transformative than we realize in the moment. Because when we pay attention to what's happening in the middle, we start to notice just how much we're actually learning along the way. I often talk about childlike curiosity, how kids naturally work through the messy middle of learning without worrying about being wrong. They explore, test, adjust, and try again. They don't see the mess as a failure, they see it as part of the process. And adults are no different. We don't lose that ability. We just get maybe a little more cautious, a little more aware of other people watching, a little more attached to the polished version rather than the process that gets us there. The messy middle is the stretch zone, not the comfort zone, not panic zone, but right there in the middle. It's where we try things before we know all the answers, where we take risks that feel small on paper but big in our bodies, where we follow nudges, instincts, and curiosities, where we make mistakes and we learn from them, where we design, redesign, iterate, refine. It's also the place where we often think, like, why is this so hard? Maybe not realizing that this tension is a signal that we're right where the learning lives. In a recent consulting session with one of my clients, she said, I feel like I should be further along by now. And the moment we named that she was simply in the messy middle, you could almost feel the weight lift. Naming it often brings clarity and it gives us that permission to breathe. I was recently at an event at Mount Royal University called Talent Reimagined, where we explored what it means to thrive in a time of profound change and how to unlock the full potential of human skills. One of the panels was on open recognition, and there was a moment within that panel discussion that really stayed with me. Neil Hunter, the Chief Learning Officer of Deloitte Canada, shared that 35% of the people they hire don't have degrees. They hire for potential and create pathways to learn, grow, and experiment. And then he said something that I wrote down immediately. The best learning happens playing in the sandbox. I love that image. A sandbox is never tidy. You try something, reshape it, adjust it, someone joins you and adds their own bit. The wind changes things, you build again. A sandbox is iterative, collaborative, creative, and so full of possibility. And adults often give themselves, or rather stop giving themselves, permission to play in the sandbox. But the organizations and leaders who create space for experimentation, that's when strengths emerge and ideas get to be tested, and there's an opportunity to see incredible growth and innovation. And it's a reminder that learning doesn't require a perfect plan. It requires a place to explore. And when I look at that through the people teaching people lens, the sandbox is really where the science, the art, and the heart of learning start to mingle. It's where structure meets experimentation and where purpose meets play. And hearing Neil talk about the sandbox also made me think of design thinking, which fits so naturally with this idea of the learning that happens in the messy middle. Design thinking's all about process. It's rooted in that innate curiosity rather than certainty. And it's built on trying something small and seeing what happens and adjusting based on what you learn. Nobody in design thinking expects the first version to be the one. In fact, if it is, the scope was probably way too small. You start with empathy, you explore the problem, you brainstorm possibilities, you test something, fully expecting to learn from what doesn't work. You iterate, you refine, you try again. Design thinking embraces the messy middle. And if that still feels abstract, here's a quick everyday example. Think about making dinner. You don't necessarily start with that perfect recipe. You might look at what you have, what people feel like, how much time you've got, what's realistic. You try something. If it turns out great, then you say, let's do that again. If it doesn't, you say, okay, maybe not that version. That is design thinking. It's learning your way forward. And we do this constantly without naming it. Whenever I talk about the messy middle, I always think about the importance of creating spaces where people feel brave enough to stay in that middle, even when it stretches them. Because learning can be uncomfortable, but it doesn't need to happen in isolation. It happens in relationship. It happens in community, and the environment we're in shapes so much of how brave we feel. When people feel safe, not just physically safe, but emotionally safe, they're much more willing to take risks, to try something new, to ask the question they're not sure about, to say, I don't know, or to get something wrong and keep going. And what I've noticed in every classroom, workshop, team, and community I worked with is that people don't need perfection. They need permission to be human, permission to be a beginner, permission to explore without having the outcome figured out. Safe learning spaces are not about protecting people from challenge. They're about supporting people through challenge. It's the difference between someone thinking, if I mess this up, I'll look incompetent, I'll look stupid, I'll look like I don't know anything, versus if I mess this up, it's okay. This is how we learn here. When we create spaces where curiosity is welcomed, where questions are encouraged, where mistakes are expected, and where people genuinely feel seen, the messy middle becomes a lot less scary and a lot more like an invitation. And that's when real learning starts to happen. And I want to share a moment where I had to learn my way forward, because this isn't just something I see in others. This is something I go through too all the time. I recently had to cancel one of my heart-centered learning lab workshops because no one registered, not a single person. And I've run this workshop before in person and online with great engagement, meaningful conversations, and beautiful feedback. So to go from that to crickets, it hit me hard. And my first thought was, what am I doing wrong? And honestly, I felt embarrassed. I felt like a failure. And it's one of those moments where you want to just quietly close your laptop and not talk about it. And I ended up sharing it, though, with a friend of mine. She's also been my business coach, and she gave me the perspective I really needed. So thank you, Jill. She reminded me that workshop signups are hugely influenced by timing and alignment, and sometimes people are just busy. She also gently pointed out something I wasn't seeing. I share a lot about my podcast, which comes out every 2 weeks, but I don't talk nearly as often about my consulting work or the learning opportunities I offer. So when I suddenly say, hey, here's a workshop, it feels out of the blue. There's no warm up, no in between, no stories or examples or invitations that help people understand the value. So she encouraged me to give my workshop marketing a whole new look, not just tweak a few things, but also create something fresh, something new, and something that reflects where the work is now. And the more I sat with all of this, the more I realized this is the messy middle. This is design thinking. It wasn't that the workshop wasn't valuable. It was that I needed to adjust how I was sharing it. Uncomfortable? Yes. Clarifying? Absolutely. It nudged me forward and away from feeling stuck and just wanting to give up. All of this reminded me of something that happened as well when my family was in Mexico recently. We were out in the ocean playing in the waves, and there's a specific spot where the waves crest right before they crash. It's chaotic, it's powerful, and of course, it's exactly where I happen to be standing. Wave after wave hit me and knocked me over. I almost lost my bathing suit, and I ended up with sand absolutely everywhere. I was standing right in the break zone, the messiest part, and it hit me. The only way through was to either go back to the calm, shallow water or move forward through the break into the deeper water where the waves carry you instead of knock you over. But you can't skip the break zone if you want to make that forward movement. You have to move through it. So many of our learning moments are like that. We get knocked down and think something is wrong with us, but nothing is wrong. We're simply in the messy middle, in the stretch zone, in the part where the waves are strongest because the learning is too. The goal isn't to fight the waves. It's to understand where we are and to keep moving toward the place where momentum can actually help us. And so much of real learning looks exactly like this. Trying something, realizing it didn't quite land, adjusting a little, trying again, being curious enough to experiment even when the outcome isn't clear. Getting things wrong in very human and very normal ways. The messy middle is where understanding is earned. It's where new possibilities emerge. It's where we learn things we never would have learned if everything had gone smoothly and according to plan. I like to think of mistakes or restarts as breadcrumbs. Little clues pointing us toward what works, what matters, and what feels like the truest next step. This, to me, is where the learning really lives. In the middle moments that challenge us, stretch us, and show us what's possible. I want to leave you with 3 reflection questions you can carry into whatever you're working on right now, whether it's a project, a class, a business idea, or something personal. First, where am I standing in the break zone? Where do things feel so messy or overwhelming because you're right in the middle of the learning, not because you're doing something wrong? Second, what small, curious experiment could I try next? Not a big leap, just a tiny step that helps you test, learn, adjust, or explore. And third, what story am I telling myself about this messy moment? Is it, I'm not good at this? Or could it be, this is the part where I learned something important? These small shifts don't remove the messy middle, but they help us move through it with more confidence, clarity, and heart. So, wherever you find yourself this week, whether you're in the calm water or standing right in that powerful break zone, I hope you can see your messy middle moments for what they are. Evidence that you're learning, that you're growing, and that you're doing something meaningful. The messy middle isn't the thing getting in your way. It's the way learning happens. Thank you for joining me today on the People Teaching People podcast. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to send me an email or reach out on social media. And if you think someone else could benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Thank you for listening. Let's keep learning together in the messy middle and in the sandbox.